As a neurotransmitter, dopamine is responsible for a range of functions, from motivation to learning to the coordination of our movements. One of the key strategies he discusses to influence our dopamine levels is the adoption of a healthier diet. Introducing a greater variety of fruits, veggies, and whole grains into our meals doesn't only provide us with necessary nutrients.
I think one of the most important findings in the last few years in neuroscience is that while the molecule dopamine is associated with reward, it's more about motivation and craving.
It's also a strategic way of regulating our dopamine levels, thus improving our mental and our physical health. Whippy, right? So this simple change in our eating habits marks the initiation of a transformative process that leads to a more balanced and healthier lifestyle.
You take two rats, and the rats independently, separate cages, can lever press for food, and they can access food. There's a little bit of dopamine that's released anytime they get some food. So we always thought that food, like many other rewards, like food, sex, warmth when you're cold, cool when you're too warm, is triggering the release of dopamine. But someone had the good idea to deplete dopamine in one of those animals. And then what you find is that the animal without dopamine still enjoys food, still enjoys other pleasures. The dopamine system is in touch with the autonomic system, sure, because it has to register success versus failure of some pursuit. The prefrontal cortex is actually part of the dopamine reward system. People often overlook this, and we just think about nucleus accumbens and ventral tegmental area. But the prefrontal cortex, because as you pointed out before, it is generating possible outcomes, different rules, different selves are being projected into the future. You can think that the two marshmallow task, the classic, give kids the option to either have a marshmallow now or wait and have two marshmallows, and the cute little videos of the kids, in the room with the marshmallows, sniffing it, talking to it. Occasionally a kid will just stuff it in his mouth. Another child will turn away, delightful, right? And all sorts of ideas have come about how they do in life versus if they can wait or not wait. In any case, that's dopaminergic anticipation. The key thing with dopamine, I think, that encapsulates the most of it is this notion of reward prediction error, which is very simple. If you are excited and anticipating something, you are generating some internal sense of the probability of it happening. We're going to the ice cream store, kids. Let's go. We're going to have ice cream. We have ice cream. It's closed. The disappointment that they experience actually brings them far lower than they would feel, much more sad than they would feel than had you not told them you were going to get ice cream, which speaks exactly to what you were saying, that it's an anticipation signal. So dopamine's going up, we're going to get ice cream, and then no. So it drops below baseline. They would have been better off being not told they were going to the ice cream store. Interoception would be an awareness of anything that's within the confines or on the surface of my skin that I'm sensing.
Oh, so literally physiological.
Physiologically, like within the boundaries of my skin, and probably touch to the skin as well. Exteroception would be perception of anything that's beyond the reach of my skin. So that bottle of water, a scent, a sound. Although, and this can change dramatically, actually. If you have headphones in, you tend to hear things in your head as opposed to a speaker in the room.
Yeah.
This is actually the basis of ventriloquism. So there are beautiful experiments done by Greg Reckenzone up at UC Davis looking at how auditory and visual cues are matched, and we have an array of speakers, and you can, this will become obvious as I say it, but obviously the ventriloquist doesn't throw their voice. Right. What they do is they direct your vision to a particular location, and you think the sound is coming from that location. Yeah. And there are beautiful experiments that Greg and his colleagues have done where they suddenly introduce an auditory visual mismatch, and it freaks people out because you can actually make it seem, from a perception standpoint, as if the sound arrived from the corner of the room and hit you, like physically, and people will recoil. Well, it is the molecule of drive. The way to think about dopamine is that it is a non-infinite yet renewable resource. Non-infinite yet renewable. What do I mean by that? Well, this relates to the energy drink caffeine question. Should you be doing all this stuff? Just as adrenaline, epinephrine, is released in response to psychological stressors, physical stressors, cold water, final exams, broken relationship, excitement, These are generic molecules, right? I mean, they're used to create activation states in the body. Dopamine is the molecule of motivation, pursuit, and desire. And it can be triggered by a number of different things. However, it is a non-infinite yet renewable resource. So if you have too big a dopamine release, let's say from methamphetamine, cocaine.
Damn, we're going there.
We're going there. Or,
okay.
or let's say, to be fair, because I know people, or from being in a lot of gunfights in a short period of time. The period immediately after that will involve a mirror symmetric decrease in dopamine. You don't go back down to baseline, you go below baseline. So we all should guard our dopamine peaks very carefully. A little bit goes a long way, a lot goes even further, but it also takes you down deeper afterwards. This is the basis of addiction. I suggest people avoid layering dopamine. You have one dopamine system that fortunately can be activated by a lot of different things. So for instance, I love the feeling of being completely rested, going into the gym or going for a run mid-morning after a cup of coffee, hydrating well, using the bathroom, listening to my favorite music on a sunny day. But that's a lot of things layering in for dopamine. And what happens is that if that becomes your hope and expectation, fine. But if that becomes your requirement for actually having a great run or workout, you're in trouble, because the next time it's not going to be that exciting and you're not going to be that motivated. You actually won't perform as well. So this year, what I've been doing is every third or fourth workout or so, kind of randomly, I leave my phone in the car. I don't use any music, and I don't allow myself any kind of pre-workout stimulant. So I have to generate all the force and energy and everything I'm going to do from internal processes. And you might say, well, that's kind of masochistic. Why would you do that? It's supposed to be fun. Well, I'll tell you, the next time when you bring your headphones and you're listening to music, you feel like a god in there. Why? Because you are secreting so much more dopamine, so much more noradrenaline, so much more effective at performance. But then the next time you have to throttle it back. And so I'm excited by all the tools that are out there, all the, there's all this like cognitive enhancement stuff, and people are plugging into every device, and they're trying to figure out, do I have white noise in the background or metronomes and all that stuff. But it's good to not layer in too many things. There are other examples of this where are a little more unfortunate. Pornography is a really good example. There's a huge issue now, right? Because pornography is so much more readily available on the internet. Now let's just remove the kind of the moral judgments about it, right? Because that's not what this is about. A scientific discussion about this would say that there's an enormous availability and range of imagery that's very powerful that feeds directly into the dopamine system. I'll start with what I've doubled down on. I've doubled down on the idea, which perhaps I stated last time we spoke and perhaps not, but I certainly believe that our state of mind and body at any point in time is strongly dictated by our state of mind and body in the hours and days prior to that. And on the one hand, people are going to hear that and say, well, duh. If you're sleep deprived, you're going to feel like garbage. And if you're well rested, you'll feel great. That's kind of the top contour of it. Mm-hmm. But when one looks at the neuroscience, for instance, of sleep, you start to realize that, the amount of rapid eye movement sleep that you're going to get in any 90-minute bout of sleep, because your sleep is broken up into these 90-minute segments, more or less, is strongly dictated by the ratio of slow wave sleep, aka deep sleep, and rapid eye movement sleep that you had in the previous 90-minute bout. And then when you start to look at the research in terms of waking states, you start to find that your ability to be focused, say for a bout of work in the morning or the afternoon, or a creative brainstorm session, or to maybe drill into some personal issue that you're dealing with during therapy or just on a walk or while journaling, is not a square wave function. None of us should sit down and expect ourselves to just drop into that state. Mm-hmm. Much of our ability to move into that state effectively, whatever effective means, right? Whatever the target or goal of that bout, as I'm calling it, is going to be dictated by what happened in the previous moments and hours. And so when I zoom out from that, what I've doubled down on is this idea that there are just a core set of foundational things that we have to re-up every 24 hours. I think thanks to the incredibly hard work of Dr. Matt Walker at Berkeley, mm-hmm. right?
the sleep diplomat on Twitter, right? It's such a great name because it's so appropriate. I mean, a decade ago or so, it was like, I'll sleep when I'm dead. That was the dominant mentality out there. And yeah, sleep's great, but getting stuff done is more important. I mean, Matt has really impressed on everybody that our mental health, our physical health, and our ability to perform is so strongly dependent on our ability to get quality sleep. You give somebody a drug that transiently increases dopamine. Works better if you also transiently increase acetylcholine or something like that as well. But for the next hours, 1 to 4 hours, the neuroplasticity is scaled up, right? It takes many fewer trials or many fewer cognitive behavioral therapy sessions. This has only been done a few times, or many fewer learning sessions to create a permanent shift in the neurology. And every time I hear about the sort of, woo statements about, I don't want to offend anyone here, but sure, I'll just say, you hear about the secret or manifesting or intention, all of that is it's capturing a fundamental principle of the way that our neurology works, which is that the prefrontal cortex, as a rule-setting but flexible rule-setting machine that taps into the dopamine system, can absolutely adopt new rules for reward release in the brain. Again, there's basically only one reward system. There's also serotonin system, as you know, but the dopamine system is the major currency of reward. So much so that, for instance, everyone knows that food is rewarding. We anticipate food. We eat a delicious steak or something, and we feel rewarded. However, if you are somebody who can attach thoughts such as, fasting is good for me, I'm going to do intermittent fasting, or I'm not going to eat those foods, and therefore I'm going to attach my thinking to the rewards that will come with better health, better aesthetics, etc. The dopamine system responds. It's not just a belief in a narrative. It's a real response. And what actually starts to happen is that people start to enjoy the foods that they are restricting themselves to more. There are actually beautiful data on this from my colleague Ali Crum's laboratory at Stanford, that if you believe a food is nutritious and good for you, it actually has better impact on your physiology. And this is why I know we have some common friends at Neuralink, and I love the demonstration they did recently. I'm a huge fan of what they're doing and where they're headed. And no, I don't get paid to say that, and I have no business relationship to them. I'm just a huge fan of the people and the mission. But my question was to some of them, when are you going to go subcortical? Because if you want to control an animal, you don't do it in the cortex. The cortex is like the abstract painting I made of your face. Removing one piece or changing something may or may not matter for the abstraction. But when you are in the subcortical areas of the brain, a stimulating electrode can evoke an entire behavior or an entire state. And so the brain, if we're going to have a discussion about the brain and how the brain works, we need to really be clear which brain, because everyone loves neocortex. It's like, canonical circuits in cortex, we're going to get the cortical connectome, and sure, necessary, but not sufficient. Not to be able to plug in patterns of electrical stimulation and get behavior. Eventually we'll get there. But if you're talking subcortical circuits, that's where the action is. That's where you could potentially cure Parkinson's by stimulating the subthalamic nucleus, because we know that it gates motor activation patterns in very predictable ways. A lot of people, young people who are growing up watching a lot of intense pornography, are suffering from a lot of sexual side effects and struggles with sexual interactions in real life, because those interactions are not as intense as the things that they're seeing. The other thing that's happening, I should just mention, is that I have colleagues that work on this in psychiatry, that they are wiring their nervous systems to become aroused viewing other people having sex as opposed to them having it. And so they're running into a lot of trouble there. So what's happening is that dopamine levels are so high that real life it's like eating extremely palatable foods that are just blitzing your system, every taste bud, high salt, high sugar, high fat, to the point where it's just, and let's assume delicious. I don't generally like those kinds of foods, and then all of a sudden it's like, here's a bowl of rice or a salad. It's going to taste like garbage to you, because you're, at first anyway.